there was a 0.0001% chance that guy's gonna pull out a gun and shoot me and my wife, I still made the right decision.
Then how much do we trust our intuition?
All right, I'll tell you the story.
Blake Eastman is the founder of the non-verbal group that studies human behavior through data. He's also a former psychology professor at the City University of New York. He's founded the School of Cards and Beyond Tells. He's researched 550,000 eye blinks and has conducted the biggest study on poker players ever in history. What is it all the body language experts get wrong about just body language?
Let's say someone worked at like the CIA or FBI or whatever, and they write a course on dating. Like, oh, like liars blink more when they're lying. It's like, no.
Why is it we want to know how like the body language of a psychopath is?
I have some traits of psychopathy. Everybody does. But it doesn't make you a psychopath.
You mentioned about some people who are contextual, some people are literal.
The real problem is when people are hyper literal and hyper contextual. Those are the people that suffer.
The resting bitch face, should that be improved?
People with lower levels of are going to have more challenges in social interactions. I'm pretty confident in saying that.
The cultural narrative is women are not that good at perceiving men. So is that something true?
I don't think so. First, women are just gonna do better than men at, I'll tell you a story about racial bias and I'll be vulnerable. So right after 9/11, I'm on a flight, sitting next to this guy. He's sweating, he's like rocking back and forth. He just does not look right. So I lean over and I go,
all right, so Mr. Blake Eastman, you used to own a t-shirt company. You used to teach at the City of New York. You used to own a poker school called School of Cards. You used to conduct you have conducted the largest study ever conducted on poker players. You have a body language course. You have something called Beyond Tells, and you have a behavioral robotics company. So what is it all the body language experts that they get wrong about just body language?
That's a great question. I mean, a couple things. So one is the whole notion that X means Y. So I think in our culture, there's this notion that if you do X, that means Y. So if somebody smiles a certain way or does something a certain way, and those things are easy to sort of teach and understand, but they're just not reality, cultural norms and all these things. So the truth is the world of body language or physical movement or nonverbal behavior, it's not what's visible that's most important. It's what's invisible that's most important. So it's the invisible norms and social structures and themes of human behavior that people don't see that shape the meaning of actual movement and behavior in a given circumstance. So I feel like there's not been that much discussion about that. So for example, like if you look at like head nodding in America versus India, like we don't have a side to side. Nobody does that, right? They don't do that here. And that's an example of it. And if you even track the movement of people in India and their head nods have different sort of embedded meaning. And what's interesting is if you ask someone to like fake it and show it, it looks different than when they actually naturally do it, which has always been so interesting. So it's just, I think the big thing is they try to make human behavior simple, but in the truth, human behavior is massively complex.
Gotcha. So like sometimes I see, body language experts go on these podcasts and then they're like, hey, it's like there are these, let's say, warmth cues or competence cues. And if you tilt your head this way, that's how you're coming across. So is that all like, just like, is there even some level of, let's say, correctness to it? Or is that just like, hey, that's complete bullshit. It's just like some people will perceive you regardless, no matter how it is.
No, there's totally themes that they're tapping into that have truth to them, right? Like, so this is the difference. You can have somebody walk into a room and they can have a set of behaviors and they can be perceived to be confident. And that's because society perceives certain patterns in behavior to be confident. The problem happens is when you try to take this advice. Like the most classic example is the steeple. Like a body language experts will say, like you should keep your hands like a steeple or something like this as a show of confidence. What that often is there's no sort of organic or historical record or reason why we do this, but it's become this sort of staple of confidence. So when you tell somebody that's not confident and feels uncertain about themselves to go like this, they often look like a person that's not confident, that's trying to do the signal that they are confident. And it has sort of the back effect, right? Like it doesn't work the way that they want it to work. So I definitely think there's a lot of trends and themes that are extremely valuable to understand and comprehend. But the issue is usually that the way they go about changing behavior in people, there's a big difference between the perception of confidence and being confident. There's a big difference between naturally emitting confidence and not. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of silliness. There's a lot of like, somebody will say something and it's like, yeah. And my biggest frustration is when they take one study and use that as a reference. Like, oh, like liars blink more when they're lying. And they pulled this one random study with a population of like 10 people. And they say, it's like, no. So those are the bigger issues.
Since you bring up studies, there was this one body language expert who was quoting this study by, I think, Dr. Wild, I could be wrong about the name, but she said basically, there was this, let's say, study group. And once they were presented with a picture of like a genuine smile. And then the second picture was like a fake smile, like it's let's say a passport photo kind of a vibe. It's not genuine. And then they studied the mood change in the study group, and they could see the change in the mood, like from the fake one to the real one. So then why is that happening?
So this is one thing. Whenever you look at studies that are done on pictures, we don't process human behavior in snapshot pictures. We process movement. So it's not like me and you have a conversation and it's like, and you make a deduction based on me. We move, we interact. It's surrounded by context. It's surrounded by a lot more. So you could design a bunch of studies to show whatever you want them to show, especially if you use images as opposed to video. So like a more interesting study would be, instead of showing a video of somebody with just a spontaneous smile versus a forced or controlled smile, what you would do is you'd have people, get like 10,000 people, and they watch two videos. One video is where one person is doing, let's say, an average of 15 controlled smiles, and the other one is where they're doing an average of 3. And you were to ask a large aggregate or a large group of people, like, what do you think about this person? Like, those are more interesting and more indicative, but the problem is they're way, way, way harder to set up. Like, you need all these people, you need to control for all the variables, you need to control for all these things. And what you would find is, depending on where you are in the world, you'd get different answers. So for certain societies, they might say like, oh, I don't see a difference. For other societies, they might say, oh, I really don't trust this person, right? So the themes of human behavior are not localized to this sort of westernized version of how you should be or not be. Like, I can go give a presentation right now to a New York City financial company, and I'd be fine, like cursing and joking around and doing all that. If I were to go to mainland China and give a presentation, there's a way that I would approach. I would be softer in the way that I delivered my statements. I would change. So a lot of it is about being able to adjust to the construct that you're in. But what happens is people read the study and then they apply it everywhere and they miss it. So it's not that they're not helpful. They are helpful, but they shouldn't be taught as rules. Like, these are rules or ways, because people really remember those rules, and then they start going out in their life and doing those things over and over and over again. And quite frankly, it just makes them often look weird.
You know what? This is something, because this is something you've specifically pointed out, that, if you touch your nose, it does not mean that you're a liar. It just means you're touching your nose and that's it. And I think this is true for like cross culture. It's not just like a Western thing. Like, when I talk to someone, even I think like past week, I'm like, I put up my hand, I'm like, just like, maybe it's a form of habit, or I'm like, maybe I just really want to brush off my nose. I'm like, since it's such a embedded culture thing culturally, I'm like, oh, like, I'm, like, what does this person think about me? Because I'm like scratching my nose. I'm literally talking about something like, I know, like stars, but it just back of my head, I'm like, don't do that.
No, so you just basically called out the problem. That's the problem, what you just said. So the problem is, somebody hears that if somebody scratches their nose, they're lying. And then they go around life looking for that thing. And then the reality is 99% of the people you meet didn't even notice that you did that. But then you're in your head because of blah, blah, blah. And it's like, human behavior is just way more complex than that. And you got to get people to see the complexity before you get them to see these sort of like basic things. And this is the truth. There are patterns in people that are relative to the person. Like, I've seen that. Like, somebody hours and hours and hours of footage on one individual, and they do a certain set of things when they're frustrated or when they want to defer or whatever. But you can't apply the things that happen for that person to everyone, or else you're just going to get mistake after mistake.
That's something I think maybe on an ideological level, that is how we humans just like treat life, which is like, for example, if I'm a guy and a girl did me bad in some way, then I just label the entire class of girls, which is like broad, and like, oh, I completely mistrust them, and like, oh, these are the patterns, and in my age we would call that red flags. We do that with other people as well, that, oh, like, all business people, all rich people are bad because that one person did that. So one thing is like, you talk about, we walk with these pre-made mental models, which is like basically just finding things to distrust. Or some people might have the opposite thing, where like they're like, hey, I completely trust you, regardless if like someone is showing signs of like I'm complete liar, and they cannot see it. So how do we start breaking that?
Well, that example was the best example of why things are complex. So you talk to one person and they're doing every single type of behavior that would suggest that they shouldn't be trusted. The person still trusts them. And you talk to another person and they're the warmest, most welcoming kind of person. They're a little too warm. They're a little too trusted. And the truth is, our stories, our origin stories, and the things that we go through in life shape how we see people. And in order to sort of get a higher level of accuracy, you need to be able to really understand your own biases, really understand, and most people don't do that work. So most people would rather find some 3 top tips of like how to trust somebody via nonverbal behavior than do the work to understand their themes, their stories, their narratives about trust, where trust was violated in their life, how they trusted their partner so much and then they cheated on them. Like, those are the things that skew human behavior and skew movement. And at the end of the day, people just make the meaning out of whatever they want to make it out of, right? So, and there are some good studies on this. Like, you show people that are experiencing depression, a really good movie, a really happy movie, they hyper focus on the part of the movie that was sad. You show somebody really excited about, like, there's a different perspective in the way that people see things.
Yeah, and I also think like in terms of biases, it's basically, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it's like anchoring bias. It's like, which is basically first impressions. It's like, all right, this is what I've portrayed you. Like, let's say I'm not a confident person, let's say. But if I portray that level of confidence just as a first impression and people anchor onto that, and then it's like that associates with the rest of my behavior, and that people take, like, even if I'm like sometimes, like shy. So you were talking about this Leonardo da Vinci effect with this one guy who was just, you had to change his behavior, but within 48 hours, there was no way you could have done that. So help me understand the biases through that example.
Yeah, so the example was this, I worked for this branding company, and they had somebody who was very erratic. So they basically called me up and they were like, hey, Blake, we got somebody that needs to give a presentation, but he's very like ADHD. He doesn't make eye contact. He looks in a bunch of different directions. And he was like, what can you do? And I was like, send him over to my office. They were like 2 blocks away. So I meet the guy and I was like, there's nothing I can do by tomorrow. Like, he needs a lot of work. And then he left and I sort of thought about it and I was like, oh, we need to like rechange or reshift how the audience sees him. So I came up with this concept called a speech, and a speech is basically a way to reframe someone's behavior. So they basically called up their client and they said, hey, we're going to send over the Leonardo da Vinci of our organization. He's weird, but he's like a creative genius and he's going to be the best. So that when the audience all knew that, when he gave the presentation, they're seeing him as a creative genius and not a weirdo. And this happens all the time. Like, there could be some awkward, shy kid sitting on a bench and I could whisper to somebody next to me and go, you see that kid? And I go, yeah, like, he was the top of his class at MIT and is one of the biggest experts in sort of like machine learning. And he just got offered a gig by Google for $1 million a year, and they're probably going to pay him more. Like, everybody wants to hire this kid. And people would be like, oh, wow. And then they see the interesting aspect, even though I made up the story entirely. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, that's the world of marketing, right? Marketing has the ability to reframe or reposition what a product is, what a thing is. That's what, companies like Apple has done phenomenally well. Like there's a certain trust that comes from when I get an Apple product, it's going to work. And that's a byproduct of me buying every Apple product there is, and they all work. So therefore, this is going to work, right? It's really interesting how you can shift how you're perceived just by changing your initial messaging.
Yeah, and when I understood what anything and everything that I was reading about you, but when this Leonardo da Vinci effect that you explained through this, I was like, personally, I do not like perception games as much. I'm like, it's a waste of time. But I'm like, that is so fascinating, both in a good way and a bad way, because it's like like that person did not have to do any work, but just through one line, like that's it. You change the entire narrative for this person. And look, maybe that person has hypothetically that person has decent like AI skills. Who knows, he might even get hired because that person was actually looking for someone to hire, just because of how you frame that situation. So the negative aspect I do see of this is just like news headlines, which is like people read a headline, they're like, it's like that's end all be all. And I know you talk about this as like, sure, you read a study, but like understand where it came from, like what was the pool size even. And like in terms of people, when you talk about not being, let's say, fooled by someone's perception, is it fundamentally, when you're thinking through it or when you thought through it, you were like, most people, since they're not logical, so they're just basing things or concluding things on like law of small numbers. They're like, hey, I saw 3 behaviors that stood out. I'm like, bad person.
Yeah, I mean, that's you articulated it quite well. I mean, it's hard because so you can't fight the games that you're in. So it's kind of like this. People are playing, like I play a lot of video games, right? It's like, but in life, and you're in a corporate environment, you're in a certain game. You didn't choose how the game is played. You can't choose the levels and what the various point structures are. But what people do is they fight the game that they're in. So like a perfect example of this is like Instagram. Like if I wanted to have better growth quicker, I know what to say to sort of trick people, right? Like if I started a video and was like, this smile is the worst kind of smile you could ever have. And I showed a smile. People love that stuff, right? But the problem is it's not in alignment with my message. It's not in alignment with my brand. So I'm willing to say, okay, I know I'm not going to progress through this game quicker, but I'm willing to take a slower route to have a better outcome. But I know the game that I'm in. So I'm not like posting content and being like, oh, why that didn't work. I know why it didn't work. Like I'm not playing that game. So it's like, how do you play the game in alignment with your integrity and alignment with your principles and not sacrificing yourself? Unfortunately, there's a lot of games in society that like, you're not choosing that. Like that's the rules of those games. So like one of the things is if you're in sales, like part of the game is reaching out to people. So it's just, if you were like cold calling or whatever you're having to do, it's like, now you can get crafty on how you reach out to people, but you cannot avoid that you're going to experience way more rejection than success. So if you're going to sit there and fight over and over again, like every time I call someone, they don't even listen to me. Every time, you're just not understanding the game that you're playing right now. And I think a lot of people fight the game and don't go, let me take a step back. Let me see what's working. Let me see what's not working. And let me play the game based on the structure that it has right now.
That's something I really agree, because I think fundamentally, just like on an emotional level, it comes down to like, I think people have generally a base belief, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it as well, is like, I tried my best and it did not work. Hence, the market is wrong or the people are wrong. But instead of going like inwards, like no matter what I do, everything, like there are just variables in my actions. And if I like, there are maybe out of 10, maybe I did 7 right, but 3 are just wrong. Or maybe out of 10, I just did 2 right. But assessing ourselves internally and then assessing the market, that the market does not give a fuck. It's like, it's what it is, no matter what industry it is. So removing that emotion, I think exactly, I believe what you're talking about. But help me understand that if, let's say, someone is a kid and fast forward, they grow up to be an adult. somewhere in between, their perception gets ruined by different things. How does that happen?
It happens usually. I mean, there's so many different ways, but it usually comes from specific moments in their life where they do something. It comes from the stories and narratives that come from their friends and family. It comes from a wide range of things, but for the most part, we're fundamentally designed to sort of protect ourselves in some way, shape, or form. So maybe a salesperson, maybe an accountant at first tried sales, and they were ringing in door to door, and the first time they ring the door, and someone says, "Get the hell off my porch," and they were like, and they really felt like disgusted and like this sucks, and then they say, "You know what? I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I've always been good at math in school. Therefore, I'm going to become an accountant." And they just reinforce that label over and over and over and over again. And then they become an accountant, right? It's just kind of like I think childhood plays such a big role in it. And usually you'll find that like people, if they experience some sort of event, they either go like one way or the other, right? They hide, or they like, no, I'm going to go even harder, right? But it's complex. Like you hear these people's stories. It's like, that's why biographies or autobiographies are so interesting. It's like, how did like Steve Jobs become Steve Jobs? Like what was it? And you find that it's a collection of experiences. He looks at a typography class in school, and it opens his eyes to the world of typography. And he looks at another thing, and his father is a furniture maker and shows that the back of the cabinet has to be as good as the front. He's instilling all these things, but there's also a baseline understanding of his personality and his obsessiveness and his willing to listen and all these things. And all those things sort of compound to leave him who he is. There's a story that I really liked between Bob Iger and Steve Jobs. I don't know if you heard it. It was like, Steve Jobs goes to visit Walt Disney World, and he's with Bob Iger, and Bob Iger shows him one of the newer hotels, and Steve Jobs is just like, this place is shit. Like, why would anybody want to stay here? Like, and he just fundamentally couldn't understand like why you would create something that is subpar. Right. And that has a lot of strengths to it, and it has a lot of weaknesses to it. And if you picked apart this guy's life and you saw every moment and every stress and every trauma and everything, it would make perfect sense why he is the way he is, and that's the complexity.
No, I like, as in like, I'm obsessed with Steve Jobs. Like any article, I'm like, I got to know about Steve. There is this, since you bring this up, there is this, I'm not sure if it is true. Seems like a Steve Jobs story where he was in the hospital and he was not well. Like he was like half awake, let's say half conscious, and he was given this face mask to put on. You know how you get the mask on in the hospital, and when he's half conscious, he is like throws away the mask, and he's like, I just don't like the design of the mask. And he was presented with like 4 or 5 designs. Now look, if it's true or not, but I'm very much willing to believe that's a Steve Jobs story. Like it fits his character for sure. Now.
But that's interesting. But on that point, like what's so interesting is like we can't copy. So younger entrepreneurs will maybe approach business, and like Steve Jobs was obsessed with design, so I'm going to be obsessed with design. And what they don't understand is at this like particular point in their career and in their life, focusing so much on design is a way of hiding out and not being seen or not being accepted. So that's one of the things about idols. Like we idolize these people, but we don't idolize the entire story, right? We just idolize sort of the end result. So like I had a client that was like not talking at the end of every meeting. During his meetings, he's like these 2-hour meetings, and I was like, hey man, like why aren't you speaking in the meeting? Like you're the CEO of this company, they look into you lead. And he's like, oh, I read this article that talked about Jeff Bezos and he doesn't talk until the end of the meeting. I'm like, that's because it's Jeff Bezos. He's like a very senior person who's got this like almost cult-like following and people and status and hierarchy and all these themes. So he wants to speak last to make sure that he's not influencing the rest of the people. You don't run Amazon right now. You run a very small company, and they need to hear from you more. So you got to figure out like, what's the game? What do I need to do for this circumstance and environment, and give it that, and not try to sort of follow everybody. But there are really interesting stories and really interesting things that you could understand from looking at these people.
No, I that's something I remember. You were talking about, like you like going on someone's YouTube and seeing their trajectory of like from when they began to when they are now. And this is something I like. I used to do this by default when I was a kid. Now I understand it. Like I really love understanding the inception of something. So I'm like, all right, it took them this much time, it took them this much progress, this is what they tweaked, these are the elements. But sometimes when I do talk to people, they're like, oh, you know what, you see this celebrity or this person, I want to be like them today. And I'm
Right.
like, the amount of just like mental effort and the physical effort and the time and all those things have gone into that. It's like, even if you tried, even if there was a stroke of luck and something happened, like it would be just like a glimmer and then it would go away. And so it's like context is just like one, I think, is just great for understanding things. So that it's like when you're
You need it. It's absolutely essential. And also the context is you don't understand how much probably personal suffering, frustration, anger, all these things came from somebody's obsession with design. Like everybody only sees the outcome. They don't see what it takes to get there. And I think if most people saw what it really takes for some of these people to create the things that they do, and you say, do you want that life? They'd be like, hell no, I do not want that life.
Yeah, I think the prices, I genuinely think the prices for high level obsession is like very high. People like, so it's like, I think people, and this is, I think another thing is, I think generally what happens is people compartmentalize all, like, you know, like someone, they see a billionaire who's into tech versus a billionaire into real estate and they compartmentalize them and they're like all billionaires. I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like the billionaire who was like obsessed with design but also in tech and became a billionaire, completely different ball game. Like the amount of obsession, innovation. But in terms of perception, help me understand, because this is something I'm like, I genuinely do not like perception games and I'm able to spot it out. Like I'm like, all right, that person is playing status games and they're not that, they fake it till you make it kind of vibes. But at the same time, what I have realized that there is a degree to which you have to play perception games, but also there is a degree to which you just have to be yourself. So how do we, like someone when I'm young, but or even someone starting their career, how do they balance that?
You have to, yeah, that's a great question. So first, you have to start with how you actually want to be perceived. So that's the work that most people don't do. Most people don't sit down and go, you know what? I want to be perceived as this like intelligent, obsessive, creative kind of person, right? Like you don't define that. So that's why it's so hard to give advice to people. So like I don't really give advice until I understand like, oh, how do you want to come across? Like if you want to come across this way or that way, there's certain things that you can do better. If you want to come across as like compassionate and understanding, there's certain language patterns and movement patterns that can create that. But people don't know that. They don't answer that. And until you answer the question of like how I want to be perceived, it's very hard to do the work to get there. And then also with the status games, like you can't fight them because they happen everywhere. So I try not to make people wrong when I see the game that they're playing. I don't get like turned off. Like so if somebody's like, oh, like, you know, showing their expensive watch to me or whatever, I'm like, all right, it's a beautiful watch. Like you must love that watch. Like not trying to get influenced by the status games. As long as you can see the games that are being played, you could maneuver them. But the trick is not to be triggered by them. Like, because if you're not triggered by them, you have more empowerment in the conversation and you're able to sort of navigate further in a way that most people can't. Most people get triggered by, oh, I see what you're doing. You're trying to do da 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 da, and then they lose control, as opposed to being like, I see what you're doing. Like, and I know how to play against that, right? And then that's how you can really win. But yeah, you kind of have to play perception games in a lot of circumstances. It's something that's very difficult to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, like recently, I think this was a week ago. Is I was very like this is the podcast is something I've started like really new. I'm insanely excited. So I was at this dinner with like entrepreneurs and some academics and all that, and I sit at this table and I just like everyone's sharing stuff, so I share about my stuff as well. And it was very apparent that they did not, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, just that what I had to say took over the conversation because it was just interesting. And this person on the left, who was an academic taller than me, clearly, it was clear the more I talked, the more he, I don't know, maybe felt insecure or whatever, and that's me making a prejudgment. But his body language was very like basically into my space and like dead staring me in the eyes, like no blink, nothing. I'm like, oh, I get what the game you're playing. It's like you're trying to establish the fact, and he was using fancy words. And it's just in that moment I realized that even though I don't like the game, I just have to like be in that moment, acknowledge that this is happening, and just like kind of also play that game so that I'm like, that person does not just like, oh, that this person is just completely unaware that this is happening to him. Like he's not just like being a victim of the situation. It's just like he's aware.
Yeah, and the truth is, so that's where it gets complex. It's like you have no idea what's going through that head. He could have just had a facial expression that has a low level of blink rate and just doesn't move that much, and or he could have been intimidated, or he could have been tired, or he could have been all those things. Like, so what's curious is like if you have 10 interactions with a guy, does he show up the same exact way, or is he different? Did you just catch him at a bad day? Did you catch? So that's like the danger of this whole concept of games is sometimes people think games are being played and there's no games being played. Like somebody is just being themselves and they're just enjoying their time, or that's just their face. And they're not this deep meaning type thing, right? It's kind of like ignorance is bliss, right? If you don't know about all these things, you won't see them in other dynamics. And that's the problem with accuracy. It's like if you over index, put it this way, if somebody is seeing status games being played out everywhere they go, they're seeing life or social interactions through a lens of status. And that's why they're seeing status games. Right? If somebody's looking at themes of like safety or themes of connection, they're going to see more safety. They're going to see more connection. So it really depends on how you sort of look at things. And the idea is you want as many glasses as possible to sort of change them for whatever the social dynamic is. So certain dynamics, yeah, status and power dynamics are going to come up. Others, there's no status and power dynamics. It's kind of like I've had moments like that where, I don't know, just, to me, it feels cringy. So it's like you go out to dinner with like a bunch of successful people. I was at this dinner once. I was the poorest person there by far, right? And this one guy kept talking about his new home that he built. He built this beautiful home in Wyoming, probably like $10 million, something like that. And he's showing everybody the home. He's like, oh, take a look at my backyard, take a look at my, and like showing everybody. And like, it seemed that he was trying to show that I belong because I have this really expensive home. And I'm looking at everybody in the room, and as you start looking at them, after the first 5 minutes, they're interested and we're having conversation. Then they're just like, okay, can you shut up already about your home? Like, we clearly don't care. And the reason why it was so interesting is because he didn't know them personally, I did. They all had houses that were like, they had 4 of those houses. And some of them, they outsource the construction, design, interior decoration of all those houses. And he was trying to show I belong, but what he was really signaling is, oh no, you don't belong yet. And then I remember to change the conversation because everybody was uncomfortable. I was like, listen, this is making me feel really bad about myself because I only have like a 900 square foot apartment. And you guys like what the hell, you know? And everybody started laughing and the conversation shifted. But what was so interesting in that moment about me being vulnerable and being like, all right, like I'm clearly not at your level, it gave me power in the dynamic because I was willing to say what everybody was thinking without saying it, right? So those things are just so fascinating. They're so nuanced. They change so much. And you could take somebody like I had no financial status in that group, but a lot of status because of my willingness to say what was needed to be said.
Yeah. No, you know what? I've been just trying to understand status from different perspectives. And I'm like, even in like, let's say a room of someone, like for a room full of like really high intelligence people, or like even room full of people with money, the way society attaches status, generally speaking, the person I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, is like the person who just outright say the truth. Sometimes it's a comedian and sometimes just like blunt truth right away that no one is pointing out. That gives you status in some way as well.
Oh, of course it does. Yeah, it's instant status because you're willing to say what's not there. And also, I've learned certain things with status. Like, seems to me that the richer you get, the more confident you get, the less you care about status. So the people playing status games are always in the middle, always like trying to be sort of higher or whatever. But yeah, some of the richest people I know, you wouldn't in a million years know they had money. It's just in a million. I don't care how many cars you have. Like, I'm not interested in cars. Like I like to see my family. So I think what starts, and I think this is a byproduct of aging. I think, in your 20s and in maybe your 30s, you start to want to play those status games. Then you build a family and realize it doesn't matter. But some people stay in them for a very long time. And status is just one of the games. There's just so many other games. I mean, a good book on status was Will Storr's book, The Status Game, I think it was called, or something like that. He just like examines human behavior through the lens of status and shows how important it is and I still have these stupid games for me. Like still to this day, I still feel superior. It sounds stupid saying it, but like when I fly business class and I know that I'm getting on the plane first and I have this beautiful seat, I'm like, look at me. It's so dumb, but like it still makes me feel like special or important because I'm playing in that game. Yeah. And if I tell a conversation to somebody about that flies private, they're like, oh, I fly private. I don't get like, oh my God, you fly private. I feel so stupid. I'm like, that's nice. I want to fly private because like there's like safety concerns with it. Like I have all these other reasons why, right? I'm not wealthy enough to fly private, to be clear. But the whole point is we all have these little games, right? So like I have status games inside of, I play this game Elden Ring. That's a really popular PlayStation 5 game. And it's like I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, oh, I got up to like level 20 and I couldn't get up the game. I'm like, all right, dude. Like you're not that serious of a gamer, right? So they're not. I think we're obsessed in our society with thinking of status related to fame, wealth, and that's not what status is. Status runs way, way, way deeper. And there's always these interchanges of status. Another example, I was with a bunch of people, a bunch of successful people, and one person there had like the best mile time. And everybody was talking about how quick everybody was. Like, oh, what's your mile time? He's like, yeah, it's like 5:10 or whatever it was. Everybody's like, what the hell? So he didn't have status in corporate. He didn't have status in finance, but he was the fastest person there, which gave him a status. And I think the most empowering thing for people is no matter what room you are in, if you look at certain aspects of status, you probably have more than you think you do, as long as you're able to understand what makes you unique and different.
Yeah. No, I agree with that because it's like, in some ways, I mean, like, when with friends, I think it's not even that hard. Like, we know it's a playful game. But like when it becomes too serious and especially around money and like, I understand the objective nature, but when it's like genuine status games, and then I'm like, okay, now that's just like, I don't know, I don't want to play that game and I don't want to be around people who play that game that much because I understand the competence levels, but at the same time, it's just like, I don't know, you don't treat people like people. You treat people oh, if you don't have that much, then you're not worthy enough. Like, do that with something else, like, but not with like money or.
I know. No, that's a perfect example. And it's like, you got to think of like, as you walk around the world, you have these invisible circles around you. And these circles, everybody does. And these are your things that you're interested in, things that you're passionate about, all that stuff. And what happens is sometimes you get into a conversation with someone that's completely from a different world than you, right? Different wealth, different status, whatever. But there's one thread that's so common that if you talk about that, boom, you're connected. And if you can look at people from the perspective of like, how am I similar and where are we both equally passionate about things, you can sort of understand how to connect with anyone. And, I've always been interested in people, like their sort of stories and like what's going on. So if I meet someone who's rich, who owns a hedge fund, right? And we're at a dinner. Right now, at this point in my life, I just don't care. Like I know a lot of people that run hedge funds, but let's say the person to the left of me, I don't know, builds electric go-karts. I would be like so interested in the electric go-karts because I know nothing about electric go-karts. So I was like, so tell me about these go-karts. Like, so, and I always have viewed people like that. Like how am I going to have a conversation with someone that allows me to extract what's genuinely special and unique about them? And I feel like it's just a healthier, more interesting way to navigate life.
Yeah. And This is something I think is like it makes people feel valuable, because generally people do not walk around life going like I'm curious about you. Like that's a level of attention, I think, genuine level of attention people are not used to. People are like generally in this small talk area, and if you're in the business world, it just heads on to business. Even with friends, or like even let's say friends of friends, you don't get to that level of, like, I genuinely want to know about you, and then it kind of throws people off. Like, what do I say now?
Yeah, and the truth is some people like they do this surface level I want to know about you. So it's like, "Oh, so what do you do?" "Oh, that's interesting." Like they don't go, "Oh, that's so fascinating. Like let me learn more." They start and then when you cheapen it, it seems like, "Oh, this person's not really interested in me. They just want to talk about." Like I had a sales call, somebody's trying to sell me software. And I call with the guy. And he starts off the call. He's like, "Oh, Blake, so you're from Austin. Like, what do you like better, like Terry Black's or Franklin? Like the two favorite barbecue stuff." And I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't even I have barbecue like once every month. Like, let's just get to the fucking point of what this call is, right?" And he's trying to build this sort of rapport in this sort of forced way, but not understanding that, like, I just don't want to do that right now. Like, and I cut him off. I was like, "Listen, this is it. I love your software, but there's 3 things that I need changed from the pro plan to the enterprise plan. Can you do those 3 things?" And it's like, if yes, yes. Now, if he got on the call and was like, "Oh, Blake, I looked up your company and some of the stuff you're doing is like so interesting," like it would feel genuine and it would feel like this guy is genuinely interested in me. Or if he said, "Hey, Blake, like I don't want to go too much off into Austin, but me and my wife are considering moving there. Like, what do you really like about Austin?" I would be so much more willing to sort of have that conversation. But when you throw out that bullshit kind of standard question, it's just kind of like, all right, like you're wasting my time because I see what you're trying to do.
And I remember you mentioned about some people who are contextual, some people are literal. So it's like, even when, for example, someone asks me this one of the fake small talk questions, they're trying to build a rapport, it's not genuine. How do you figure that out? And before you answer, this is something I recently faced. So I'm not sure, but I think I'm a very hyper literal person, because I was at this restaurant, and like this girl who was working at the restaurant, she had to walk me to the table, and it was like a good 60-second walk. And she asked me like, "Hey, what are you up to?" And me being very hyper literal, I just assumed, oh, she genuinely wants to know about what I'm doing. And it was not even like, like a dynamic of like a girl and a guy. It was literally, I'm like, oh, this person asked me X, I have to answer Y. And for those 60 seconds, I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and this is interesting, and that and that. And then I was like, the tables arrived, and now she went back. Wait, that was not even a dialogue.
Yeah.
I should have like not been that genuine, so to say. So how do you figure that out?
I don't think that's bad though. Like, I think being literal and contextual. So most people, you're not on the extreme. I can tell you right now because I've tested so many people. You're not on the extreme side. You're probably somewhere in the middle, right? Maybe middle, but leaning towards literal or whatever. The real problem is when people are hyper literal and hyper contextual. Those are the people that suffer, right? Where they don't see any of the nuance, or they see too much of the nuance. And usually what I'm trying to do is, like, when I talk to somebody and figure out where they are on that spectrum, you sort of develop like these patterns for it. Just the way they ask questions, the way they answer questions, the things that they see most into. Like you will usually understand where people are on that spectrum based on what they complain about. So like a contextual will be like, "Oh, like my new manager, like I don't know where they're at, and they kind of say some weird things to me." And a literal might be like, "My manager talks too much. It's like always talking. Just tell me what I want to do so I can get it done." You see it through their lens of complaints. And that's kind of how you see where they are in the spectrum. And then that's what I do. Like most of my assessments are grounded in like kind of complaints. And now that I think about it, like what are they complaining about and what do they not like? So it's like, how do they think people should act? So contextuals think people should give more context. Literals think, why do I need to give more context? I said, "How are you?" And I'm asking you a question, "How are you?" But then sometimes the tone is a little bit off. So they're like, "How are you?" And they don't seem like they care, but they do care. They just don't have a control over their sort of body and in a way to be on a line with what works.
Gotcha. And I remember you also had like a terrorism class. Like, what is that about?
I have a terrorism class. There's 2 things that might have came up. When I was in graduate school, I did my certificate in terrorism studies because I went to a school with a lot of law enforcement. So I got very interested in sort of like terrorism and all that type of stuff. And then I think maybe we used to have members from the FBI counterterrorism. I was funny. It's a funny story actually. So like these three people come to one of my classes in New York, and like I knew that they were law enforcement. I knew it. Like you can just tell. I was like, all right, and I was like, we got some cops in the background, and I said cops, and they went FBI counterterrorism, not cops. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, like my fault, like different level. And there's a fascinating sort of world of human behavior inside of law enforcement. It's a very unique. That's one of the problems with body language people is like, let's say someone worked at like the CIA or FBI or whatever, and they've interrogated a bunch of people, and they write a course on dating. It's like two completely different social dynamics. And like so you can't take interrogation techniques, maybe some, from one area and like carbon copy them to another. The truth is, like, at the end of the day, interrogation is about interest in a lot of ways. Like the best interrogators are just very good socially. And usually the difference between interrogation and day-to-day life is when an interrogator enters into like a social construct, they usually have some sort of ground truth. So they have some information that you might not have or that they don't know. So they can play these games on trying to figure out what's going on. But like all the body language stuff in interrogation gets tricky because, you know, if some people are just influenced, like they get pulled over by the cops and they get nervous. It has nothing to do with them committing a crime. They're just anxious because of the social construct. So it requires a lot more care.
And like, why is it like that we as humans generally go towards extreme examples? Like, for example, we want to know how like the body language of a psychopath is, or like a sociopath is, or like even terrorists. Like, generally speaking, that we would maybe never even encounter a person like that, or like maybe the probabilities are, let's say, not 100%, right? It's like lower in comparison to what at least we think. So then what is it about these extreme scenarios that we want, like, oh, like, you know, I really want to know about that. And then we kind of see people through that, like use that lens to see just like the general world.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is what you said. It's that we're not logical. And most of the stuff that we're inundated with is the cool, sexy things, the shows about psychopaths and serial killers and all that type of stuff. So it's in the cultural narrative so much, which would make sense on why we want to find it in our sort of day-to-day lives. But yeah, like the chances that you're, you know, whatever is a psychopath is just really, really, really low. It's not what people make it seem like it is. If you follow some, you know, popular media, you'd think like everybody's a psychopath. And it's like people can have traits of psychopathy. So like there's totally, like there can be I have some traits of psychopathy. Everybody does. But it doesn't make you a psychopath. The same way some people can have traits of one personality paradigm and traits of another. It's more complicated than that. But, you know, I think it's cool and it's interesting. And, you know, our society has become obsessed with it. I mean, I went to school for forensic psychology. I took classes in the assessment of psychopaths, and they were so cool and so interesting and so fun. But I think what happens is the more and more you learn about it, the more and more you get in it, the more you understand the nuance, the less you're like, okay, this person's a psychopath. It's like, nah, there's a line there.
By the way, there was this, do you know this actor Glenn Powell? So have you heard of this story where he was talking about his girlfriend's friend who visits this? Okay, so his girlfriend's friend basically goes on this date with this guy, very charming, all that stuff, and he takes her back to his place, which is like mutual, consensual. Am I using the word correctly? Consensual? Yeah. Yeah. So when they're back at his place, he's like, hey, I just want to massage you, like flirtatious, whatever. So he takes this lotion and massages it on her, right? And for whatever reason, she feels this maybe intuition kick in or whatever. She's like, this is just a bit weird, right? And she's like, I gotta go. Like, I'm not staying here. Anyway, next morning, her skin starts itching. So she goes to the doctor and she's like, hey, I don't know what this is about. And obviously I would assume, so has no suspicions about nothing. The doctor tells her that this is like one of those lotions that kind of disintegrates your skin before you are eaten. And look, I don't know this is a real story or a fake story.
That's so creepy.
But like he said this on camera. And like what I'm trying to understand here is then how much do we trust our intuition?
That's a great question. I mean, I have a lot of things. Intuition's so tricky, man. It's one of the trickiest things in the world because all right, I'll tell you the story. So I gave a presentation about intuition. And I started with this story. I told this story where I was like, when me and my wife were moving from Vegas to Austin, we drove. And on the way here, it was about 10 o'clock at night, we go into this kind of shady gas station. It was just kind of gross, but we both needed water. We needed to go to the bathroom. So long story short, a guy walks in and I look to my wife and I go, let's go. And my wife knows to try. I was like, let's just get out of here. And she's like, yeah, let's go. So we walk out, right? We walk out, we get in the car, we drive to the next gas station like 40 minutes away. And then like 4 weeks later, I get to Austin and I find out that there was this robbery at this place and it was that guy, right? It was that guy. So I tell this story on stage, right? And everybody's like, how did you know? I was like, well, the nonverbal. And then I joke with them. I was like, that's not what happened. And they're confused. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, that's not what happened. Here's what happened. I walked into the store. Everything happened, but I don't know if I was right or wrong. So the guy walked in. I said, let's leave. But there was no news story. There was no news story about it being that person. I made that part of the story up. And I said, the reason why I'm telling you this is because my identity as somebody who's very situationally aware, would love to tell that story of like, oh my God, but that's not the point. The point is, if I thought there was a 0.0001% chance that guy's gonna pull out a gun and shoot me and my wife, I still made the right decision for that particular moment, right? And I think what happens with intuition is this beautiful thing. I mean, we're unconsciously processing all this stuff, but intuition comes from putting the reps in. So it's kind of like basketball, right? Like I played basketball my whole life. I know by watching a shot if it's gonna go in or not. Like right? You just know. Like especially even when you play, as soon as you release, there's certain shots that you're like, I'm good. Like it's gonna be all net, it won't touch anything, right? But that's from the reps. So a lot of people sometimes have these intuitions about things they know nothing about. And then they don't have experience in. And then they're like, oh my God, like I think that's trust. And what you'll find is people are so likely to tell the story where their intuition was right. And they completely forget all the times where their intuition was completely 100% wrong. Right? Like, you know how many times I've been on a plane or some sort of thing and I'm like, I don't know, this person seems sketchy or this person seems, nothing happened to the nicest person in the world. Right? Like it's all of that. It's all that. I'll tell you a story, a story about racial bias, and I'll be vulnerable. So we're all racist and biased in our own ways. And anybody who thinks that we're not, they're crazy. Like it's just how human behavior sort of works. So right after 9/11, like 5 years later or 4 years later, I'm on a flight and I'm sitting next to this guy, a Muslim guy, and I grew up with Palestinians and Iranians and all kind of Muslims. I'm the most understanding person, but I'm inundated in the media by saying like, oh, there's terrorists, there's this, and this. So it's in the forefront of my process. And this guy is sitting there and he's sweating. He's like rocking back and forth. He just does not look right. And he's sitting, I'm on the window seat. He's on the aisle seat and I'm in the middle seat, right? And I start going, oh my God, this guy's gonna blow us up and take off this plane, right? So I reached the conclusion. I'm like, statistically, it's not gonna happen. I know, I'm like telling myself, like, Blake, you know, Islam is a beautiful religion and this is extremist. I'm going through all this stuff in this. So I decide to just have a conversation with the guy. So I lean over and I go, hey man, are you okay? And I just say it like that. And he goes, no, I'm not. Like I'm on a connecting flight and because I have to see my whole family and he starts going into this whole story. He's a terrorist. The poor guy wanted to see his family, right? So that's my point of like, you can try to get the context and not treat people as evil and not treat people and be like, oh, I wonder why this person is acting the way that he is. And then I reached a conclusion that I was like, oh, if he acts weirder, I'd be able to understand that, okay, maybe I can do something to stop the event. You know what I mean? So like through conversation, you just see that like people are people and not everybody's doing like terrible things. And the fact is the chances of somebody doing a terrible thing is way less than someone just nervous about catching a flight, right? And if you really peel that apart, you peel like all the themes and all the things and all my bias and all that stuff. If it was a white guy at that time, I probably would have created another reason for him. But my brain went to terrorists because that's what I've been told on the news. So I just feel like the ability to break that shows that you have an understanding of the biases that are shaping you and gives you the ability to really connect with people no matter who they are.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I really think that is not something that most people remotely admit.
Yeah, they don't want to admit it. They don't want to share it. And you know what the funny thing was? He said in the middle of the conversation, he goes, I probably look like a terrorist. And we both started laughing.
Okay, yeah, but like, this is something that recently happened to me, which is like in the gym, there is this one guy who like, well, he's decently built, looks tough, like demeanor wise. And generally I'm like, you know how it's like if after 3 interactions you have literally never even done a head nod, the 4th one is just like you won't go for it. So I was like, all right, it's been like 3 months, we see each other eye to eye and that's it, like there is no head nod, nothing. So, and one day I was like, I don't know why, late in the gym, so I was just like, yeah, let's just like say hi. And I did say hi and turned out to be first nice interaction, second nice, then third one we met outside the elevators, like we had a good conversation. And now I'm just like, I still don't know who the person is internally, but at least I think I have way more information than just my bias that, oh, this guy must be like, let's call, like maybe he's a dick. And apparently he's nice to me in conversations. And even that's not conclusive.
Yeah.
But that's just more than
it's a perfect example. A perfect example of just like somebody had a stern face, who knows why, and you slowly broke it. And it's like, okay, we don't really know people as well as we think we do.
Yeah. And like in terms of the stern face, the stoic face, or the resting bitch face, like should that be improved? Should that be accepted? And if that should be improved?
It depends. So I think a neutral or non-animated face, or commonly known as like a resting bitch, but like resting bitch face is not neutral. Like usually like resting bitch face, I keep saying it, I don't like calling it resting bitch face. I call it like resting negative face. It means that the average, like how I mathematically define this, is like your average facial resting construction. So everybody's got like a average construction is creating some sort of pattern that leans negative. So for example, if like you see somebody who's older and they have, loss of muscle in their face and then they kind of sulk like this. Right? So my resting face, interestingly enough, is not leaning neutral. It's just leaning towards not a lot of animation. So when I have to even train myself, like my wife used to make me like, Blake, you like I'll tell you, like when I was younger and I was in clubs, like clubs or bars or whatever, everybody would always walk up to me and ask me for drugs all the time. All the time. They'd be like, hey man, like you hold in, or like, do you have any? And I'm like, no, like, no, sorry man, like no. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why does everybody think I'm a drug dealer, right? And the reason is because like I was uncomfortable in those environments and I didn't know how to play and I didn't know how to have fun. So I'd be like this most of the time. So the assumption for those people were like, oh, that's the more serious person. They're here for dealing drugs. And I was like, why does everybody think I'm a drug dealer? Until I saw myself on video, and I was like, oh shit, like I look very stern, right? So the trick is being able to, that stern face, I still use to this day, but I also can expand my range. What's really important is everybody, whatever your state is, it's not wrong. It just needs to be expanded. So I also know how to show warmth and enthusiasm and all those things, but I know how to be stoic during a negotiation. I know how to do all these. So it's the more you can expand your sort of facial awareness and facial geometry, I guess, the better you can deal with whatever social construct you're going to be in. But for the most part, people with lower levels of facial reactivity are going to have more challenges in social interactions. I'm pretty confident in saying that.
Mm-hmm. And I also saw videos of you from like 12, 13 years ago. And generally, I mean, most people, I would assume so, like just generally people speaking, is they would not have a transformation. It's just how people are. And then they accept the face, like people would not even wake up and think about, hey, I need to change how I move my face or the muscles or how I smile. But for you, tell me if I'm wrong, but 12 years ago when I saw you in a video and now when I see you, like even the enthusiasm levels are higher. Even the way you express yourselves are just like,
Yeah, so
is that something consciously you have worked on?
No. So this is interesting. So it depends on when you watch the videos. So the videos of me are kind of like a timeline of what I'm going through in life. So some of the videos, 12 or 13, if a video was 12 or 13 years ago, things weren't the best. I also wanted to be perceived as an expert. So I was more stern and more all these types of things. That wasn't my natural self though. So at the end of the day, my highest form of communication is when I'm just like me and I'm just present and I'm enjoying myself in that. So if I were to actually go back and look at my classes from the ages of like, I liked my communication better from 24 to 27 than I did from 28 to 33. Like I almost felt like from 28 to 33, I lost who I was. Where I was just this like expressive, excited, enthusiastic person. And then I went into tons of debt and an IRS and was trying to pay bills and live in New York City and, you know, spend all this money. And I started not liking what I was doing. That's what you're seeing. So it wasn't me working specifically on, it was me unlearning or looking deeper at my life and thinking about what I like and what I don't like and so on and so forth. And also I get burnt out sometimes about talking about like what I did. So the context was I used to run a course, a 3-hour course every night, 6 to 9 p.m. in New York City for like 3 years. So after a while, I was like, I don't want to fucking talk about body language. You know, so the enthusiasm wasn't there. So I had to sort of reshape it. So it's very interesting observation. No, I did not work on my physicality. I worked on my mindset to get back to where I would like. And I still envy a little bit, 24 or 25-year-old. 24 or 25-year-old Blake was fucking fearless. Like, didn't overthink things, just did things, didn't question. And then there came a period where I questioned too much and I tried to get perfect. And I found myself, I'm very grateful for my past. I'll be 40 now. And now I feel like a balance between the 24-year-old Blake and the 36-year-old Blake. Because the 24-year-old Blake was not responsible, sometimes didn't really know what the fuck he was talking about, and I feel like that journey has change my style or change the way that I communicate. But very interesting observation. Yeah, I would look at those videos and be like, not me.
Yeah, I mean, this is just something I realized is like, this is exactly the example of what you're kind of trying to help the world understand.
Yes,
even right now, I just made an assumption on the basis of not even a picture, but your video, which is, right. Look, I saw the video and it's not like a 30-second, it's pretty sizable, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
No, but it's a very good assumption. The assumption makes total sense. Like given who I am and what I do and all those types of things. But the truth is, I stepped into a different version of myself when I was 22 and started teaching. I got in front of an audience. I was always pretty confident. I had a lot of social anxiety when I was younger, but most people couldn't tell. And at the end of the day, most of what I do in my work, working with people, it's not about teaching them what to do. It's removing on how they think they need to be. So it's kind of like this. It's like this happens where like I'm going very hard on YouTube this year. And part of me wants to script my videos because I've become very good at writing videos and scripting them out. But when I read off of a script, you can't, I'm good, but I'm not me. And the whole joke is I'm teaching people to be more of themselves by not fundamentally being myself. So like the middle ground is like, all right, no scripts. Let's create like really good outlines. Let's create really good structures. Let's read it and let's just go through it because that's more like me, right? And maybe like the intro will be scripted because it has to be for the hook or like whatever it is. But I have the luxury of looking at communication and being like just naturally I am better than average. And I've worked on this over years and have so many hours of talking that's an easy thing for me. For some people, that's not easy. Like, they are not just going to be able to be like, hey, everyone, and just like have a conversation. So you got to really meet people with where they're at and design something for what they need and then work towards that.
And you also, like, as you mentioned, like some people might not be good at that, like just right off the bat. And it's something to do with being self-conscious, anxiety, all that stuff. Now, I remember you specifically mentioned that, and I hate when I say it like that, like it sounds like an interview, but like less of a conversation. But like, no, just the way I addressed it. But there was I think something you talked about, which was if you try to tell people not to do something, they do a bit more of it. And that also kind of relates to poker, where if they have tells, the more they try to hide those tells, the more it is revealing. So like, why is that happening? Like, because then it just should be like very simple, right? It's just like, all right, it's just me. This is how it is.
Because like what you resist is what persists. So I'll give you an example that happened like 2 weeks ago. I was on a podcast here in Austin with my friend. No, not the podcast. We first did a live workshop together. Me and my friend Matt King, right? And Matt King, in the middle of this live workshop, 30 minutes in, he goes, Blake, as a communication expert, what are you working on? And I was like, I'm actually working on right now reducing certain vocal fillers, specifically the word like. I keep saying the word like, and I feel like it's unnecessary, and I don't know why I'm doing it. And he was like, and he looks at me and he goes, I just said it, interesting. And I go, yeah, I'm reducing it. Then the next 30 minutes of the podcast, I said like 30 times. Because I was aware. And at the end, Matt said to me, it was the craziest thing. You didn't say like once the first 30 minutes. And then after you called out that you're working on it, you kept saying it. I was like, I know. Because I was in my head about saying like. And I was, don't say like, don't say like. I just said it. Okay, focus. And then I was fundamentally not present. And that created more of what I was resisting, right? So it's just something that comes up. And most people wouldn't even have noticed that I said like.
Yeah.
I notice it, No, I mean, like I notice my own little patterns and my own little things. But at the end of the day, I know what an effective version of me is and what a non-effective version of me is. And the effective is the closest version to myself. And when I feel free and open and all these things, and I move a lot and I have gestures, and I am willing to accept that person for an increase of, let's say, 10% vocal fillers, than have someone else that comes across perfect, but is not that passionate about what they do.
You know what? With the word like, I use a lot of fillers. Like it's something I think I do a lot. And literally, I think so 2 or 3, literally like a filler. But like 2 or 3 days ago, this guy, Vinh, he's like a speaking coach. And he was like, if you're trying to...
Oh, the magician guy or whatever?
Yeah, like he is spiky
hair. I like him. Yeah.
So like, I don't know why it came on my feed, but it was like, if you're trying to avoid filler words, turn the dial on them, which is like, just say like. He's like, now it's like you bring it from your subconscious to your conscious, and now you are annoyed with yourself. And it kind of like, it's like a pain mechanism, I would assume. But on the flip side, I'm sure you know Gary Vaynerchuk. He says like. But
Gary is just fundamentally, I'll comment on both of those. So one of the reasons I don't love a lot of body language or communication experts, one of the reasons why I love Vinh is he doesn't try to do like the studies show that he just gives good advice, right? And he shows it in real-time applications, and he's just so flawless of a communicator and just so like interesting and dynamic, but isn't trying to play this research game of like 17 studies show that. He just gives the advice. Like what bothers me is when people take research that they don't understand and use that as advice. It's perfectly okay to say, in my experience as a communicator, as an educator, as a speaker, I have found this to be one of the most helpful things. That is so much better than trying to find and it shows me that he has a foundational belief in what he's bringing to the world. And I love that. And then Gary's the same thing. Like, Gary is, people don't understand, like Gary's an O-fucking-G. I just spoke to one of his groups actually not too long ago, like 3 weeks ago. And he's just such an OG because he was a lot of the entrepreneurial and social media playbook that man was saying like 20 years ago. And what's fun? Go to Gary's channel and look at his first videos.
Yeah.
When he's like spitting wine into a Jets bucket and see his evolution as a person. And yeah, he's just 100% himself. He's also a very smart guy and really successful business owner. And that's why I always thought like Gary was so cool, is because he was giving advice in a very real way, but it's not like he's just some kid in his like he's running this giant media organization too. So yeah, there's many paths, but Gary is the fundamental sort of New York, New Jersey style of just like, this is me, accept it or fucking don't, right? Like that's how you deal with it.
I think on social media, he just might be the person who might have normalized just like cursing, like fuck it. Most people were not that comfortable. And I think there was a period where he was just like, it's me, I really don't care. And he was just like, to the audience, he would say like, I really don't care, bitch. And like, wait, like you do that in corporate events? Like, come on, like chill out.
What it is, but reason why it works too is it's such a pattern interrupt. So like if everybody's used to you communicating one way and then all of a sudden you communicate a different way, it's like, whoa, like what was that? And he repels certain people. Some people are like, I don't like that. But the people that he attracts really, and it's much easier. There's a great quote. I always hate it because I think Bill Cosby said it. So it's a bad reference because, Bill Cosby like raped people and stuff. But I don't know the key to success, but the key to failure is trying to please everyone. And if you could over-index on who you are as a person and be really grounded in this is who I am, and I'm excited to share that with the world, and the people that are going to like it are going to like it, and the people that are not are going to not. It's a great approach as long as you're not repelling a very large percentage of people. So sometimes people go, this is who I am, and they do that, and 50% of people don't like them. That's a little too high, but no one's ever going to like the analogy I use, Dark Knight is one of my favorite movie of all time. Dark Knight Rises, and just so good. And whenever I feel like down about my work, I go on IMDb and I look at the negative reviews of that movie. And there's people that give that movie a 2 and I'm like, what are you people are you insane? Are you absolutely crazy for saying that's a 3 stars? And then I'm like, I feel better because I can't please everybody and it's going to be impossible. People are not going to like me. People are going to say but the people that do, I'll hopefully improve their life. So that's all that matters.
That reminds me of, I don't know if you know this, Christopher Nolan specifically works with Tom Hardy just because of his expressive eyes. And in Dark Knight, the Bane is like this, Dunkirk, just you can see this. And I was that's so...
that's nuanced, man. Yeah.
That's so nuanced.
And also noticing that level of talent in someone, but also it requires a level of understanding of body language as well, not just the movie from the broad perspective. So I found that very, very fascinating.
I'm doing a series on YouTube. It's very interesting, where I'm going to be dissecting communicators. So, and basically what we do is when I say dissect, we pull every video of them on YouTube and run analysis and try to find out what makes them special, what makes them good, what makes them unique. I'll do that on Tom Hardy's eyes because I haven't thought about that way. So I'll take tons of segments of Tom Hardy's eyes and why did Christopher Nolan say that, and show, because what I'm trying to do is I don't want to be the kind of person. It is very easy for me to do reaction videos of other body language experts saying things and be let me tell you why it's complete bullshit. I know it will do very well. I know it will. Mm-hmm. But I never want to be the source of someone else's suffering. So I don't want someone to he's right, he made me wrong. I don't want to do that. So I figure let's highlight what makes people great instead of trying to rip people apart, right? There's enough people ripping apart people. We don't need more of those in the world. We need people that are building people up and not ripping them apart.
That brings me to you write 2,750 words daily.
Not now. I did all of last year.
Okay. But even then, it's something one, it's a intense practice. It's a intense goal. It's not something small. What is it about writing that appeals to you? I have my hunch, to be honest with you, but why does it appeal to, and why should most people be opting into writing?
All right, so first let's talk about why writing's so important. Second, let's talk about why I took on that challenge. The first, why it's so important is because writing, for people that are constantly in their own head, there's no checks and balances in your own head. You can't argue with yourself. So writing allows you to take your thoughts and put it on paper as a way of empirically looking at it. And I have found it so helpful. Like when I'm stressed about something or when I'm concerned about something, writing out my thoughts really works. Also, as a communicator, we want to be structured thinkers. We want to be able to think in a structured, methodologic fashion so we can communicate it. There is no better way to do that than writing. So like if you can't write out your ideas, you're not going to be able to speak them. So writing allows you to sort of put the reps in. And it's such a valuable thing. I mean, I've written a lot in my life, but I wrote a lot last year. So last year I wrote 1 million words. It wasn't 1 million. It was like 985,000 words or whatever it came out to. And the reason why I start every year with a daily challenge that I'll do daily for the rest of the entire year. Last year was writing, today was post daily. And what I do is I make it compound. So I started writing 1,750 words, then made it 2,000, then made it 2,250, but I did it because I was like, I want to start getting out there and I want to start, I'm writing a book right now, I'm doing all this stuff. What is the one activity that I would do that would guarantee that I would improve this? And the answer was writing. So I did that. And I'll do the same thing. So like with Instagram, like figuring things out, post on Instagram for 2 months straight. Then I'll post on LinkedIn every single day starting in March. Then I'll post on YouTube every single day starting in April so that it compounds. Yeah. And I take my dailies very seriously. Whenever I do them, I never break them. And it's just no matter what, this is what I like about dailies. No matter what you go through in life, if you do your daily, you feel like you're stepping closer to success. Like, no matter what you do. So even if it's a workout or even if it's like run a mile, whatever you want to do in your life, it's like, it could be the worst day in the world. But if you did your one thing, it's just, there's something about it. It feels like I'm moving forward. I'm really working towards something. And that's why I like them.
Yeah, I think there's like kind of an anchor effect as well. It's like, like everything could be like going bad, but then this one thing is just like you get a small dopamine effect as well. Like, oh, I did my thing. It was not that bad of a loss, even if you don't consciously think of it. Now, this is something I am trying to figure out because there's a venture I'm on now. Is like, what fundamentally makes a good question?
That's so hard. The reason why it's so hard is because I'll send you the content. In my program, I have an entire phase on how to ask great questions, right? And if you look at, so first of all, there are a lot of components, but the biggest component to asking a great question is context. It's why the best questions come from people that have done their like homework. So, and the second component is if you rank bell curve, like questions on a bell curve, the best questions are questions you've never been asked before. So it's all of a sudden like, oh, that's sort of interesting, or oh, I've never been asked that before. But it's all about the game of what the intent of the question is. And that's what people don't think about. So people like go to a dinner and they're like, oh, so do you like this restaurant? They didn't really think through that question because that question, yes or no, it doesn't really go anywhere, right? Like there's so many ways to so people are not thinking. The best questions have a predictive quality to them, basically, meaning you know that the decision tree of all the ways that the person could answer that question is going to lead you to solve the intent that you wanted to solve for. And unfortunately, that takes time. So I'll give you an example. I was on a train and it was on the Line Railroad. There's this guy next to me wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. And I'm a big fan of Star Wars. And there's a lot of questions I could have said to him. But I turned to him and I go, have you read the Darth Bane series? That was the question I chose. And the reason why I could have said, that question is infinitely better than saying, are you a Star Wars fan? Because if I say, are you a Star Wars fan? It's like, well, I'm wearing a t-shirt, like yes or no. And then it puts the agency on him. So now he has to reply with something that's going to lead to connection. But by saying, did you read the Darth Bane series? His answer to that question would tell me so much. So if he said yes, we'd both instantly know that we're deep Star Wars fan because most people don't read Star Wars books. They just like watch the movies, right? And that would create belonging and connection. And like, oh, did you read the Thrawn series? We could start an amazing conversation. If he said no, I could convince him to read that book. I could be like, listen, I know you're wearing the t-shirt. I don't know how much of a fan you are, but promise me you're going to read that series because it's so good. And you understand the Sith and the history and da-da-da-da-da-da. So I know that no matter what happens on how that person responds, I have the ability to further the conversation. If I say, are you a Star Wars fan? He could say, yes, are you? Or he can say, yeah, or, oh, I don't even, this is my son's t-shirt or whatever. So it's about controlling outcomes with the questions that you create. And that takes there's a skill set to that is tricky. But once you start to understand the context, it's easier. So the best person for this, the single best example of world-class question asking that I have seen in my life comes from this guy, Kevin McCarthy.
Oh, I was not expecting.
No, so Kevin McCarthy is this, kid. I don't know how old he is now, but he looks pretty young, that does celebrity interviews. And every single time he asks these celebrities a question, they go, whoa, like, who are you?
Like the Nardwar, the young kind of Nardwar vibes.
Yeah, he's just incredible at asking questions. And the reason why he's incredible is he's such a fan of the craft of acting and filmmaking that he taps into nuance. It's not like, so what was it like working with Leonardo DiCaprio? He articulates so much context, so much passion, and does everything that every other interviewer in his space is not doing. I'm such a fan of that guy. I'm actually doing like a 2-hour breakdown of his systematic questions because it is so hard to get celebrities to ask that way. Celebrities are asked questions all the fucking time. And this guy has just found a formula which he doesn't even know what he's doing. He has no clue, I promise you. He's not engineering or orchestrating. It's just his natural passion and enthusiasm for film. He asked Steven Spielberg a question, and then when Steven Spielberg is off camera, he goes, that guy's going to be a filmmaker. He's got the stuff, like the highest compliment you can get. So sometimes I think that the best questions come from context, enthusiasm, and understanding the social landscape that you're asking the question in. If you can do those three, you're going to ask better questions.
And you also conducted, I believe, a study like on the questions of Tim Ferriss, because that's what I thought that whom you were going to mention.
No, it wasn't Tim. It was this guy, Kevin. Because the reason why it wasn't, Tim's a great question because he does the same thing, context, interest, all that. But the reason why I said Kevin over Tim is because Tim now has his own social status and hierarchy. So it's unfair to compare, right? So Kevin McCarthy is just this kid asking questions. But Tim Ferriss is like a goat. It's Tim Ferriss. So that gives him an extra influence and an extra power in his question asking. But yeah, Tim Ferriss also Worldcraft. Worldcraft, they're different. Tim asks questions that are able to get answers that other people can't get. And it's based on the way he thinks. And he's also just honed that craft because a lot of his books were written, from my understanding, as a byproduct of asking questions of experts. But yeah, we're going to do one on Tim Ferriss, Kevin McCarthy, and I'll probably pick 2 or 3 other people that I think are really good at asking questions and sort of deconstruct what they do.
Yeah, I'm genuinely looking forward to that because this is just a question I'm trying to fundamentally figure out is what actually are the components of a good question in all sorts of ways. But something that really intrigues me is, let's say, the cultural narrative around dating, around just 2 different sexes. I know you conducted a study around, I think it was way back in New York City with you blind date with 20 people. Yeah. Were you even able to find something, or was it just hey, most people are making these conclusions, it's just inconclusive?
Yeah, what I found was sort of that at the end of the day, the people that were more reactive or understanding of nonverbal behaviors tended to have better dates. I found that people that had real discussions tended to have better dates, the deeper the quality. It wasn't really about looking for some sort of, what's interesting is the reason I did that study at first was to do that. I wanted to look at patterns, and then I realized 20 is not enough. I'm going to need to do thousands and thousands and thousands of dates, and I didn't want to do that. So what I did use the dating footage for years was understanding other people's perceptions of what good dates and bad dates are. And what I did find in that was that they were way off. So like I would show the date that would lead to actually the second date and a date that led to no date, and people would think that, oh, they had like an awkward moment so it wasn't working, and it's like, nope, they had an awkward moment but they still wanted to go on a second date. So it's the deeper quality of the connection and the conversation. So the people that went deeper and really formed a connection was more likely to lead to a better date. But at the end of the day, the reason why dating's tricky is because attraction is just such a baseline. Like if there's not attraction, if the guy wasn't attracted to the girl and the girl wasn't attracted to the guy, and they had a phenomenal phenomenal date and discussion, they still didn't want to go on a second date.
So you were optimizing for the second date and nothing else. Like it was just like, does it lead to the second date, and that's it.
So this is how we did it. We put people on blind dates, and who left first? The guy would leave first, and then I would ask the woman, would you be willing to go on a second date with this person? Yes or no? And I would ask the guy, would you be willing to go on this? No, that was it. So we measured it by were they willing? And I think out of the dates, it was like 60% were no, 40% were yes. Some were like, oh yeah, definitely. And some were like, yeah, I would be. So yeah, like maybe. And some were like definite no's and definite yes. So you find everything in between that. But like there was this one date where like the girl was like clearly very attracted to the guy. And it was like, oh yeah, he was, and they just came from the same, they both grew up in like Minnesota. They both loved hockey. It was just like a love at first sight kind of thing. And he happened to have a girlfriend and was just doing this for money. And I was like, hey, like she wants to meet you. He's like, I have a girlfriend. I kind of like her too. I'm like, dude, I don't know. It's on you what you want to do. I'm not going to be the moral high ground here.
Yeah. But like, what is it like? And the cultural narrative, generally speaking, is women are not that good at perceiving men initially. And then they make conclusions. And if it leads to something wrong, then, it creates other sorts of cultural narratives from their perceptional lens. So is that something true? Like, is it like there is, or like it's like both men and women both are like just almost bad at perception? Am I thinking?
I don't think so. I think that first, women are just going to do better than men at processing social constructions and nonverbal behavior for the most part. Not across the board, but if you actually like, they're going to be better than men on average, for sure. I definitely believe that. I think it's evolutionary more than anything else, right? Like a mother has to be more hypersensitive to the movement of their child. And it doesn't mean all men are like this, but I do think there's an evolutionary component to that for sure. But I think that we're in a society, I have a lot of thoughts about this, right? So let's look at dating and how dating has changed. If we were to go back, I don't know. So me and my wife met in one of my classes, not when I was a professor, but one of my body language classes in New York. She came, took a class. We've been together like almost every night since then. It's like 15 years ago or whatever. I grew up before apps. So before I met my wife, there wasn't like dating apps and stuff like that, right? It was just like Plenty of Fish or certain websites, and it was kind of creepy and weird. Now, apps are like the foundation of dating. Like people go on these apps, they swipe, they just. What sort of happened in our population, I think, is that the higher, I don't want to say status, but the more desired people, both men and women, understand that they have a really wide spectrum of choices and optionality because they can do all that, right? It wasn't always like this. Like you grew up in a town and it was a small town and it was like, oh, that's my potential person or not, because you couldn't get anything else. And I think what's happened to our society is we've come sort of, what's the word? We've become like
Paralyzed with options?
Not paralyzed with options, but like overconfident because of our options. And you know what I mean? So then, you go on a date with someone. Like I've heard some younger people speak about the most ridiculous things. Like they go on a date saying, oh, like he said this during the date. I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. You had a good time. It was enjoyable, but they said one thing that you really just didn't like.
Red flag.
And red flag, like, bye-bye. It's like, what? Like, are you crazy? Like, give people the benefit of the doubt on dates. I say a lot of things that I'm like, what the hell did I just say? Right? It's not how it works. And I feel like our society with things like red flag and ick factor and all that. We're orienting towards looking what's wrong with people and not what's beautiful about people. And anybody,
what is about
exactly. And listen, if you're a really successful, well-spoken, well-mannered, sure, you can go around life and you can do that. But you're not going to be happy. Like, you're just going to find problems with absolutely everybody. And I feel also some people, like, you know, without being an asshole, it's like, yeah, they have all these standards. Like, I want this. It's like, okay, but what are you bringing to the table? Like, you're none of those things. You know, it's like, I want someone in shape. I want someone who's making a lot of money. I want somebody who's well-spoken. I want somebody. And I'm like, you're none of those things. So maybe work on yourself and get that if you really want that. But I feel like our society needs to be a lot more forgiving. And I do think the reason why it's changed this way is because of optionality. Because people have more options, they can be more critical of others. But what they don't realize
I really
is
agree with that.
being more
Like,
critical of others is perfectly
it's just this
correlated to this sort of
this is something
increase in loneliness in our society.
Anytime someone
don't
just
think so.
like, you know, like really
I think
thinks
that
this red
first,
or green flag,
you know, women are just going to do
person
better
literally lacks
than
critical
men
thinking because
at
all right,
processing
they did this one bad thing out of 60 minutes and like
behavior
red
for the
flag
most
or like
part.
green flag.
Not
Either or
across
is
the
wrong.
board, but if you actually like,
and
they're going to be better than men
another
on
thing is
average,
just
for sure.
This
I
optionality, I
definitely
do
that.
think gives people, like, you can deal with people a bit more loosely, so to say. So I think that gives you the leisure as well. Like, it's like, that's how freedom works as well. If you have options, you have freedom in a way. But also it's like, if it's like unregulated freedom, and I'm not in a literal way, but like unregulated freedom completely, now you are like a spoiled kid in a, like, on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. There's just like, the cultural narrative reinforces this nonsense. So there's this show with Kristen Bell on an Adam something on Netflix. And it's about this like blonde-haired girl who starts dating a rabbi, right?
Right.
And the show is just so cute. Like, it's just a very cute show. And I'm watching the show and I'm like, oh, this is so cute. And then they had an episode called The Ick. And I hated the show after that because I was like, this is everything wrong with our society. Like, this guy is compassionate, all these things. And then she was complaining about like the sweater he was wearing. And I was, the show was an ick. And it was like, I don't know if they did that as like a representation of society, or I have no idea. But I was like, this is the reinforced narrative that somebody can be great, but have one thing wrong with them. And it's like, take a look at yourself. You've got a lot of things that are great about you. You've got some things that are not so great about you. We just got to be more understanding. And like I said, I think the optionality is like not doing that.
Yeah. You know, one thing I really loved, and I've not seen this ideology occur like a lot, which you said, is like, it was in the context of prisoners, which was like, and you've dealt with prisoners, so it's like you have like physical, like, you know, like evidence of, you know, how they behave, and like to an extent how, you know, how they converse and all that. And you said that it's like we would always assume that we would never do that. Like, it's like zero chance, like that's not me. But just to realize the fact that we are thinking from our lens and our context and our experiences in our life. But if we literally were faced with that, you know, like, we don't know what the situations they were in, there is a very high likelihood we might. And I find that very fascinating because I'm like, I genuinely believe in that. It's like the people who are kind of doubtful of how good they are, they at least have an opportunity to constantly, they have this voice in their head, which is like, hey, am I good enough? Am I good enough? And they have to push themselves. But the people who are convinced, and they kind of also go on the virtue signaling side of things, now, like, those are the most delusional people. So it's just something I loved when I found that out about you. I'm like, no, that's a very practical way to actually think about it.
Yeah, you don't know. It reminds me of that movie, another Christopher Nolan movie, Tenet, where and there's that scene where, you know, he sacrifices himself for his team, and then like nobody knows what they're going to actually do until they do it, and he proved himself by doing it. You have no idea, you have no clue what you're going to do. So it's like we're very quick to judge how people respond to things and how, like, I see this with like celebrities all the time. Like, you don't know what it's like to be a celebrity. I can't even imagine what it would be like if I walked out this door and people were like, oh my God, can I have an autograph? And there was people snapping. I'd probably lose my shit too and break some cameras and say certain things that I didn't want to say. Like, it's just, you gotta really understand what it would be like in that person's shoes to understand why they may act the way that they act. And then their behavior makes more sense. And we don't do that context shifting enough. We don't put ourselves in other people's shoes. We just like to view things from our world.
One thing, what I really find interesting, and you tell me, is like what I generally find, at least from my perspective, my perception, is people who are really logical, who are intelligent, so to say, they're able to understand logic very well, right? It's like, all right, this is how you deal with people, this is how they are. Like A means B. They're able to understand like the second order effect, third order effect. They can remove the emotion, or sometimes they might not have that emotion. What I find interesting about you is like constantly, is like you really understand logic, which is, it does not get more logical than data itself, right? But at the same time, you have this human side of you. So how are you able to, like, if I think someone, let's say, just for the sake of conversation, someone had the right to have like hardcore conclusions that, hey, you know what, I did a study on this person and they behave this way, which means, they are way more bad than people might assume. Like, you have hardcore evidence. But then I see this flip in you, which is like this empathy, which is like, yeah, but they're people. How are you able to balance that? And is it just like something conscious, or is it just like genetic, or a mix?
No, that was a really good question. So, yeah, okay. So the way that I deal with that is I don't believe in there's logic and emotion. I don't believe in the paradigm of logic and emotion, right?
Okay.
And there's, if you want to learn logic, there's like conditional logic, like, and you can like go and look at like ancient Greeks got into this, and you can take books on logic. But saying there is data to support something and reaching a logical conclusion that you should follow what that data is shows that you probably have a misunderstanding of what research really is. And because the truth is, you can give me any data set and I can have it sing whatever I want it to sing. So to me, it's like, yeah, there are certain things that are sort of logical, but if you look at it, I believe that there is like, I guess my answer to this is I don't really believe that there is such a thing as logic. So this is what I mean. I do believe there is a thing as logic, right? But when we talk about human interactions and people, everything to somebody is logical from their perspective. So people don't think that they're illogical. People don't go, I'm acting illogical right now. They act in alignment. So once you understand their worldview, it goes, okay, it makes perfect sense why you did that, right? So I consider myself to be a very logical person, right? I do the most illogical things all the fucking time, right? Because from my worldview and from that perfect moment, it makes sense that I should do this right now because I have my own logic. So I just feel like there is logic, and then there's the fact that people will justify and create reasons and answers for everything, which has me see more empathy for them and has me understand that from their perspective. That's why I like it. Like, there's no such thing as everything is logical when you look at somebody's perspective. So even when you talk to somebody who just did the dumbest thing in the world, and you're like, okay, take me back. Why'd you do that? And they were like, well, I thought this. It was not right. But to that person, it was. And I've just seen myself do the same thing. So how could I not have compassion for other people that are? Anybody that's like, oh, you're acting illogically. And someone who talks like that, if you follow them around with the camera, do you know how many times you're going to find that they act illogically? It's just we're not designed to be these massively logical creatures. That's not how our brains work.
I have, two thoughts on that. One, then the first part is then what I just out of interest about, how people on the spectrum think. Autistic people, I find them to be just like, they're hyper literal, hyper logical, very data oriented, information oriented. So then you would call them a very like really high in logic, right? In comparison to, let's say, the masses.
Right. So, but this is the whole point, right? Like, so Yeah, take somebody that's like on it's hard because it's so complex, the spectrum. But let's say, yeah, high functioning autism, they're at their job and they say something to their boss. They say, this makes no sense. Why would you do this? This is not the logical outcome. It's so much easier to do this, right? That's them being logical, but that's not them being effective in that social construct.
Of course.
Because now the boss is like, well, who the fuck are you? Like, I just told you to do that. Like, you just started working here. Like, shut up. And they don't understand, like, wait, I was just telling them the right answer. That's why I have so many compassion for people that are like that. But that's like, yeah, that's logic within one construct. It's logic within the construct of efficiency or the operations or systems of the team. It's not logical inside the construct of understanding how humans change or make decisions or what likability is or not, right? So that's why it's so complex, right? Logical in one area, may not logical in another. And the only way to truly get understanding of what logic is a understanding context. And that's why the study of logic is so cool, because like the study of logic is cool because it's its own construct. But logic inside of social dynamics is a completely different thing. Right? There's a logical argument, right? Like, so it's an interesting question.
No, I understand what you're saying. And it's like, obviously, like even autistic people, they're optimizing for an outcome, and within that domain, they can be like hyper logical and try to figure out all those things. But this is the second take I had, and you genuinely tell me if my thought process here is wrong. I was like, as you mentioned, people are logical in their own minds. And also, I know that you mentioned that like people generally don't have a theory of mind, so they're not even aware of the fact that if they are being logical or illogical. And my thesis was, let's say, make a judgment on a person, whatever they do, right? They could even go kill a person. They could even just, shout at someone else, right? The action does not matter. But if you kind of just backtrack that, which is like, okay, they did the action X, then maybe there's some context. Maybe there was something happening in their life and so on and so forth. But then you also realize that the reason they also reacted is just because of how their brain is wired. Like they have a more like higher propensity to just like reacting or like anger, and it's just fundamentally, like I'm simplifying it, but like fundamentally just wires in their brain and chemicals in their brain. So which means it's like you cannot change the person if they firstly won't change. So you're just judging someone's existence.
No, you're opening a deep rabbit hole of like what determinism is and stuff like that. So
okay.
If you really want to read Robert Sapolsky's work, so he's got two books. He's got a book called Behave and a newer book. And the newer book answers the exact question that you just said via biology. His thesis is like, based on your neurochemical wiring and all these things, that it makes perfect sense that the person acted that way in that moment. And it's a very interesting book. But so what you just brought up is kind of like a big debate. It's a debate about deterministic qualities and free will and all these types of things. But the way you articulated it is 100% sort of correct. It's just like the answer is
undeterministic.
It's such a rabbit hole. It's like right now there is a little piece of like wire coming off my phone case that's bothering me, and I want to pull it off, and I'm staring at it, and like all the aspects of Blake, there's a certain amount of time that is going to prevent me from taking that thing off. And it's like, can I fight the will of that? And do I really have free will? Is it just destined that at some point or another, I can't take it. I'm going to take it off. And can I fight that free will? I think about this all the time. Like when I'm driving in a car, right? Like I'm driving in a car and I'm like, I could just like turn the wheel and end my life right now. I could just kill like 20 people right now if I wanted to. But I'm never going to do that, right? Like I'm never going to actually get to that point. So I think if you start to even argue or go down the path of looking at free will and determinism and all those philosophical constructs, it makes you a better person because it has you see that the answer is not so black and white.
Yeah, it's not like one defined meaning. And this is what I really do not like about like, I think you're really on the opposite spectrum. of a motivational speaker or even like an expert, so to say, in the industry, because they don't have to focus on nuance. They just know what will trigger people and make it work. And there is no intention of giving nuance later on as well. Right? Yeah. So it's just like, I get it, it's celebratizing yourself, but at the same time, I mean, giving people a perfect meaning of life, which is basically a definition of a cult in a way, is like, this is your path, follow it, and I'm the god here.
Yeah, the truth is, I hate the word expert. So watch videos. If you watch some videos of me and people will say like, you'll notice sometimes they'll be like, oh, and Blake Eastman is a body or the world's expert or an expert in nonverbal communication. And I always will be like, yeah, like whatever you want to call me. And the reason why I don't like the word expert is there's just something about expert infers that you've arrived. And I believe that anybody that's a student of anything should never arrive at anything. And there's a danger in calling yourself an expert because you think you have it figured out. And you don't. You're like, I'm like, study human behavior for a living and optimize social interactions. My thoughts change, my ideals change, my approaches change. And like, the thing that was funny is when I was 24 years old and wasn't an expert in anything, people called me a body language expert because they took my class. And I'm like, all right, like whatever. But I don't like that label or identity for myself. I never want to call myself an expert. I always want to call myself a student. I always want to learn. I always want to do this. But the social game is like, yeah, when somebody says, Blake, are you an expert in body language? I'm not going to be like, no, let me give you my whole philosophy about what it is to be an expert in life. I'm just going to shake my head and be like, sure, I'm an expert in body language, like whatever you want to call me. So it's interesting. But yeah, I think expert's dangerous, man. Call yourself an expert and you start getting like, I'm the fucking guy and look at me and I'm the person you go, and you stop learning and you stop getting passionate and you stop questioning your own ideas and your own concepts.
No, I really think it's just like the person who says, I don't know, and has the most, like, you want to call it reps, you want to call it just like rigor for finding more, has, like, I think people generally tend to think in just like, this is right, this is wrong, and we compare, like, it's just two buckets we have for, which is kind of funny in a way if you think about it, like for anything and everything in life. But it's like when you just say, I don't know, the degree of that I don't know is what matters. And that's how you determine, like, so-called an expert. Like, okay, he knows more than the most people in the industry and he has data to back it up.
And that's also how you can tell, I know I don't like the word expert, but you can tell the people who get the nuance. And the way you can ask them, where you understand, is if you can you ask a simple question and they answer it, and then you keep following that thread and they can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And most body language experts cannot do that. So if you ask them like, okay, so they'll like, oh, well, a study found, and then they go just go, oh, wow, it's interesting. So it's like, oh, so explain to me how the study was designed and how you reached the conclusions that you reached based on that study. They don't have an answer to that. So that's like, anybody that understands the nuances, that means they've done the work and they sort of get it. And unfortunately, it just takes a lot of time to do that.
This is, something that I think Elon talked about from stage. This exact concept is like when someone really knows about their shit, you can like question them and they will they can give you the second answer and the third answer and fourth. Mm-hmm. And this is something I have like, just like in a way of like, categorizing people, generally speaking, is like most people, I think, have a tendency to just discuss topic after topic after topic so that they don't have to go in one single silo deep. And I really prefer is like obviously a podcast is not really optimized for something like that, generally speaking. So it's like, even if you wanted to go deep, I mean, you can, but then it depends on what you're optimizing for. But it's like, I really like, oh, you know what, like, let's go deep fucking waters. And I'm like, sure, we'll talk about this for 12 hours. And I know most people won't. But then that is how, you're like able to figure out that, oh, this person really fucking knows their shit. Then there is a category of people who kind of know it. And then there is obviously people who just make shit up.
Yeah. And usually the warning sign for it is absolutes.
Yeah.
So like when it's people like, you should never have sugar, or you should never do this, or like, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Right? Like there's people, but absolutes work really well for Instagram and for the internet when it's like, this is the one thing you're doing that's ruining your relationships. People are like, what's the one thing, But yeah, not good.
We are trying to save this cognitive load. So it's like, and I think this comes back to the fact that, you're talking about people just focusing on just removing these lens from our perception and like processing each event or each piece of information for itself and not making any conclusions. Because otherwise the opposite of that is what we just talked about, is just looking the world from this one lens, deciding what it is, and then living your entire life and never changing. One thing I do have to tell you, what I found fascinating, tell me if this is right, is, again, this is a huge hunch. Is your truth-seeking behavior based on this underlying level of like solving anxiousness for yourself?
I'll give an example.
I think it was up until a certain age. Like, I think for me, like, I was anxious. I wanted to work on that. But now it's not, I don't have anxiety, like social anxiety. I walk into any space and I'm like, fine. I could understand what it's like for other people. I do experience anxiety in my life, just not related to people. Now it's more just about like puzzle. I find people and this whole thing interesting, and I find teaching it challenging. So it's like trying to teach it in the most effective way. And that's what really makes me sort of interesting. But I'm always just, people are so complex that it's a puzzle. I always really like puzzles. It's like a puzzle I'll never get bored of. But yeah, there's less of me like, I don't feel like I'm trying to heal myself right now. But it totally was when I was younger. Totally. Now it's different.
Yeah, there was this moment about air turbulence in your life, the one that you experienced. And I was like, most people, when they experience air turbulence, they're like, sure, they experience fear, anxiety, anxiousness. They go back home. Maybe they develop a fear. They either want to go back to the plane or they don't. But that is an emotional level of processing that goes on. What happened with you is you kind of just figured out everything about planes, which is like you talk to commercial pilots, Air Force pilots, and these are rules, so on and so forth. And you found a logical solution to your fear. And I was like, that is, and I kind of figured that, okay, that is how you're also solving other things as well, at least initially, maybe not now. And like Elon, it's just at the top of my mind, so it keeps coming back up. But Elon did the same thing when he was a kid, where he saw darkness, and he's a kid, he got afraid. And he was like, hey, like, I'm afraid of the dark. But then he figured out, hey, it's just lack of photons. And it gave him a logical reason to not be afraid of something that was just an emotional processing.
Yeah. It's context. Like that. But also the interesting thing, the illogical part of me is I probably suffered on flights for 2 years before I made the decision to actually take a logical approach to it. That's the illogical thing. So like, and my flight it was a bad flight. Like the pilot said in his 30-year career, it was the worst amount of turbulence he's ever experienced. Like the plane just dropped and people were crying. It was crazy. But then I was like nervous. I wasn't nervous on flights. I would just I get nervous when it moved. Yeah, I suffered for about 2 years. And then I was traveling so much. I was like, I have to solve this. And that's when I guy who flew Air Force 2, had a conversation with him, another pilot, an engineer. I learned all about the subsystems. I read a couple of books and I'm like, this is the safest thing ever. Like and then it just was like so dumb when I'm like, this is dumb. I'm safer here than I am sitting on the corner of my apartment. And now I'm not really that afraid of turbulence. I still don't like it like anybody else, but I don't panic.
Gotcha. And something you've been pretty candid about is like your relationship with your family, but specifically your father.
Yeah.
What did the relationship with him teach you when, you had a relationship with him when he was here?
I mean, the truth is I've probably learned, actually, it's not, I don't know. What's sad is that the greatest lesson that my father taught me was when he died. So it was his death that taught me more than anything he's ever taught me, which is kind of crazy. I think a lot of my self came from my mom more than my dad, like the person who I am today. But I can see myself in both of them. Like I can see the hard worker and the creative and the sort of focus on perfection of my dad. And then I can see the sort of straight, aggressive, like get to the point and emotional intelligence of my mom. But I think when my dad passed, it was just like one of these things where Like I remember when he passed, when he was sick, when he had ALS, I was like, I'm going to work harder than I ever worked in my life. And because that's all I know. Like when I work, like I'm a worker. But then 2 weeks later, there was this moment where I'm sitting in my apartment and I'm looking at the sunrise and I'm drinking coffee and I'm like, no, this is life. Like the fact that I am not dying right now and I am healthy and I could experience sunrise and a coffee. I want to be more present. I want to enjoy my life more. I want to do all those things. Work's not the fucking answer. And that was something I always theoretically understood. But my dad dying, it solidified it. It really, really, really solidified it. And it's just, you always know that you can potentially die or you can, but you know it intellectually. You don't really feel it. When my dad passed, I felt it. I was like, oh shit, like this is something real. And like, so now I just believe that everywhere in the world, people are going through so much shit. Like, who am I to complain? So I like gaslight myself all the time. So like, no matter what I'm going through, I'm like, well, I don't have ALS. I'm not dying. I'm not in a foreign country getting shot at. Like, shut up. And it's been really, really, really good for me. And then also, both my parents, I had a really, really, really loving, amazing parents. And it had me see just like, I always could go to my parents for anything. They were phenomenal. And I feel like I am the person I am today only because of them. And I don't think people realize how much your parents really shape who you are, especially in those earlier years, and just like internally grateful to both of them.
Nice. And if you had to give one message to the world, and this is the message that you can only write on your epitaph, what is that message you want the world to see?
Oh, I don't even know. On my epigraph. Like part of me selfishly wants to say something stupid and make it funny, right? Like if it was an epigraph. And then the other part of me would be like, I would probably put something like I would probably thinking like all the problems that you're thinking about right now, you won't be thinking about when you're here. Or something like that, right? Because the person reading it is not dead. So something like everything that you're experiencing that is this, it doesn't really matter. And it's really, you see how many people suffer over the little things. And what's sad is you sometimes have to go through bigger things to see how the little things don't matter. So like there's some quote that like everybody's worst day in life is whatever their worst day is, which is kind of like really interesting. It's like if your worst day was when you, I don't know, like lost your leg or something, that's your worst day until you have another day that's worse to sort of compare it to. And unfortunately, we don't see the world that way. We become very accustomed to our environment and we're not reminded about like how grateful it is just to be alive and how grateful. And it sucks that it's a flaw of like the human condition that we only get it when something bad happens. When something bad happens, we get it. So like, you're in the gym and you're like doing so good with your lifts. And then all of a sudden one day you're really down and you're like, oh, like my bench is low. And you're in your head about all this stuff. But there will come a time 30 or 40 years later or 80 years later or whatever time, well, you would give all of the money you have to be able to just touch a bar and bench again, right? Like that always, it just creeps me out. And I know that happens for me. So I try to coach myself out of it as quick as it possible. Like, oh, I'm grateful even that I can run. Why am I caring? I'll tell you also another thing about that. My friend Natalie, she's a neurosurgeon, a pediatric neurosurgeon. And I was talking to her about like as a neurosurgeon, is there anything that like bothers you? And she's like, there's a lot of things. And she's like, the one thing that I don't really get, like I really don't get, is why people get mad on their birthday. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, oh, like I'm turning, 40. Oh my God, I'm getting older. She's like, as seeing so many young kids die, like every birthday is just such a privilege that you are alive because other people don't have that opportunity. And I love that perspective. Like every day is another day that you're alive. Every day is another day. So even your worst problems, at least you have the worst problems right now, right? Unfortunately, it's not everybody sees the world that way. So I don't try to tell them that they should see the world that I try to meet them with where they're at. Because some people really think that this is the worst thing that ever happened to them. Even though it's not, I have to sort of empathize with, okay, right now you might think that it's the worst world and it's fine.
Yeah. Well, we'll end it there.
Yeah, that was great. That was great, man. You were great. You're great. Really good questions.